600 tons. A single stone, heavier than a fully loaded 747, 45 feet long, cut with precision that modern engineers still cannot fully explain. And there were thousands of them, rocked together without mortar, held in place by nothing but gravity and mass, plated in gold so thick that when the morning sun struck the eastern wall, pilgrims had to shield their eyes or look away. For 46 years, this temple was under continuous construction. It was the pride of a nation, the envy of an empire, one of the undisputed wonders of the ancient world. But a carpenter from Nazareth stood in its shadow, looked up at those impossible stones, and said 5 words that should have gotten him laughed out of Jerusalem. Not one stone upon another. How do you dismantle something that weighs more than a fleet of battleships? Why would any army on earth waste the energy to fry apart a mountain of limestone, block by block, when they could simply walk away and leave the ruins standing? What happened in Jerusalem in 70 AD didn't just destroy a building. It fulfilled, with archaeological, microscopic, bone-chilling precision, a prophecy that no human mind could have engineered. And proof is still lying in the valley where the Romans threw it. To understand what Rome destroyed, you have to understand what stood there first, and what it meant. Around 960 BC, King Solomon completed the most sacred structure in the ancient world. Built on Mount Moriah, the same mountain where Abraham had raised the knife over Isaac, Solomon's temple became the permanent dwelling place of the Ark of the Covenant, the localized center of God's presence on earth. When the temple was dedicated, something happened that stopped every priest mid-step. The glory of God filled the house like a cloud, so thick, so overwhelming, that the priests could not continue ministering. They stumbled backward, their knees buckled. The presence was not symbolic. It pressed against their chests and stole the air from their lungs. 1 Kings 8:10-11. One moment they were conducting the ceremony, the next they were on the floor. Not because they chose to kneel, because standing was no longer possible. For nearly 400 years, that glory remained. But in 586 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon breached the walls of Jerusalem, burned Solomon's temple to the ground, and dragged the Jewish elite in chains to Mesopotamia. The wound was devastating, but it came with a timestamp. The prophet Jeremiah had told them exactly how long it would last.
In the wilderness.
When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. Jeremiah 29:10. 70 years, not a century, not someday. A specific, countable number, a divine expiration date stamped on their suffering. And when the 70 years ended, precisely on schedule, the Persian king Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return and rebuild. Under the governor Zerubbabel, the returning exiles laid the foundation for a second temple around 516 BC. The younger generation, the ones born in Babylon, the ones who had never seen Jerusalem, shouted for joy. They had a temple again. The sacrifices could resume. But the old priests did not shout. They stood at the edge of the new foundation. Their hands trembled. Their eyes swept across the modest stones, so small, so plain compared to what they remembered. And they wept. Not quietly. The book of Ezra says the weeping was so loud it mixed with the shouts of joy, and no one standing nearby could tell one sound from the other. Imagine being 80 years old. Imagine carrying the memory of Solomon's temple inside your chest for your entire life. The golden walls, the cedar beams, the weight of God's presence pressing you to your knees. And now, you're standing on a pile of rubble in the rain, looking at a foundation that could fit inside Solomon's courtyard. The young men see a beginning. You see a gravestone. An entire generation crossed a desert to come home, and home was smaller than the memory. For 5 centuries, the Second Temple stood, functional, humble, a shadow of what had been. Then, a king who was not even fully Jewish decided to change that. Herod the Great was not a man who built small. An Idumean client king appointed by the Roman Senate, Herod launched a renovation of the Temple Mount around 20 BC that was so massive it fundamentally altered the topography of the mountain itself. His engineers constructed colossal retaining walls to expand the sacred plastron, doubling its size. The stones they used were not ordinary blocks. Archaeological excavations along the western and southern walls have uncovered ashlars that defy comprehension. One stone near the western wall measures 45 feet in length and weighs an estimated 600 tons. It was quarried, transported, and positioned without modern machinery, without mortar. The stones held together by nothing but precision cutting and raw gravitational force. The temple itself rose above this platform like a snow-covered mountain. The Jewish historian Josephus, who saw it with his own eyes before its destruction, described walls of pure white marble plated with thick sheets of gold. The reflection of the sun off those gold plates was so intense that visitors physically could not look at it. From a distance, it appeared to be a mountain of fire. Robinson's Arch soared 75 feet above the valley below, one of the largest masonry arches in the ancient world. The complex contained graduated courts of increasing holiness: Court of the Gentiles, Court of Women, Court of Israel, Court of the Priests, leading finally to the towering sanctuary that housed the Holy of Holies. It had been under continuous construction for 46 years by the time Jesus walked its courts, John 2:20. This was no ordinary building. This was a fortress of faith that seemed as permanent as bedrock. And then came the moment that shattered everything the disciples believed about permanence. The afternoon sun was low over the Mount of Olives. The golden plates on the temple's eastern wall caught the light and threw it back across the Kidron Valley like a second sun. The smell of sacrificial smoke, lamb fat, and cedar wood drifted from the altar and hung in the warm spring air. Jesus was walking away from the temple for the last time. His disciples followed, their sandals scraping the limestone steps. One of them, likely a fisherman from Galilee who had spent his life staring at wooden boats, not marble palaces, stopped mid-step. He turned. He looked up. "Teacher, look! What massive stones! What impressive buildings!" His voice had the breathless pitch of a man seeing something that exceeded every category he possessed. These rural men from the north had grown up in mud brick houses near the shore of a lake. The stones above them now weighed more than their entire villages. Jesus stopped. He did not look up. He did not follow the disciples' gaze toward the gleaming porticos and the towering sanctuary. He looked at his disciples, one face at a time. They see the stones. They don't see what's coming. They can't. Not yet. Then he spoke. "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." The Greek word he used, kataluo, does not mean topple or damage. It means to loosen down completely, to dissolve, to systematically disassemble. He was not predicting a fire. He was not predicting a collapse. He was predicting a deliberate, meticulous, stone-by-stone dismantling of a structure that weighed more than a mountain. Silence. Peter's mouth opened, then closed. John looked at the stones. 600 tons of limestone fitted so tightly you could not slide a knife blade between them. Andrew looked at Jesus, then at the stones, then at Jesus again. His eyes said what his mouth could not. That's not possible. None of them could imagine it. Have you ever heard something so impossible that you dismissed it completely, only to watch it happen exactly as it was spoken? 40 years later, the stones were still standing, but the empire was no longer patient. The breaking point came in 66 AD, when the Roman procurator, Gessius Florus, slandered the sacred temple treasury. Riots erupted. The riots became a rebellion. The rebellion became the bloodiest war the province had ever known. Initial Jewish victories stunned Rome. Rebel forces expelled the Roman garrison from Jerusalem and ambushed the Legio XII Fulminata at Beth Horon, inflicting a catastrophic defeat that humiliated the empire. Emperor Nero sent his most battle-hardened general, Vespasian, with his son Titus and 60,000 troops to end the insurrection. Vespasian did not rush. He crushed Galilee first, town by town, fortress by fortress, pushing the surviving fighters, the refugees, and the radical zealots southward, into Jerusalem, like driving animals into a cage before sealing the door. When Rome's political chaos produced the Year of the Four Emperors, Vespasian was declared emperor in 69 AD and left for the capital. The task of taking Jerusalem fell to Titus. But the greatest enemy Jerusalem faced was already inside its own walls. The torchlight threw shadows across the grain stores in the lower city. Mountains of wheat, barley, and dried lentils, enough to sustain Jerusalem through years of siege. Enough to outlast any army that had ever camped outside those walls. The moderate Jewish leaders had stockpiled it carefully, knowing that Rome would come. John of Gischala stood at the entrance. Behind him, 40 armed zealots. In his right hand, a torch. The flames reflected in his eyes, wild, certain, beyond reason. An elder stepped forward. His voice cracked. "If you burn this, you kill us all. Not Rome. You." John did not lower the torch. "If they won't fight for Jerusalem, let them starve for it. Hunger makes warriors out of cowards." He threw the torch. The grain caught slowly at first, a curl of smoke from the nearest sack, a tongue of flame licking the edge of the barley pile. Then the fire found the oil stores behind the grain. The eruption blew the elder backward. Within minutes, the heat drove everyone from the building. Within an hour, a month's food supply was ash. And John of Gischala burned the next storehouse the following night, and the next. 3 rival zealot factions, John of Gischala, Simon bar Giora, Eleazar ben Simon, were tearing Jerusalem apart from within. While Rome sharpened its swords outside the walls, the defenders inside were killing each other and burning their own means of survival. The calendar turned to the month of Av, and the weight of history pressed down on the city like a hand. The Babylonians had destroyed the first temple on the 9th of Av. Now Rome was closing in, and the same date was approaching again. Centuries apart, the same month, the same city, the same frames gathering. But there was one difference that changed everything. When Babylon destroyed, God gave a return date. 70 years. A prophet spoke. A countdown began. A family leaving Jerusalem in 586 BC could carry Jeremiah's scroll against their chest and whisper to their children, "We'll come back." God promised. Count the years. When Rome came, no prophet spoke. No scroll offered a number. No promise was made. A family fleeing Jerusalem in 70 AD carried nothing but their children and the smoke in their lungs. One exile had an expiration date. The other had a period. Full stop. Silence. Same calendar date. A completely different divine sentence. The smell of burning grain was already thick in the streets. Soon, it would be the smell of burning stone. In the spring of 70 AD, during the Jewish festival of Passover, Titus marched on Jerusalem with 48,000 troops. 4 full Roman legions, the 10th Fretensis, the 5th Macedonica, the 12th Fulminata, and the 15th Apollinaris. The timing was calculated cruelty. Titus allowed tens of thousands of Jewish pilgrims to enter the city for Passover. Families who had traveled from Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, singing psalms of ascent as they climbed toward the temple, carrying lambs for the sacrifice, their children on their shoulders. He let them all in. Then he sealed the gates. No one leaves. The population inside the walls surged far beyond what the city could sustain, and every additional person accelerated the depletion of food supplies that the zealots had already burned. He weaponized the holiest week of the year against the faithful. Within weeks, the famine became a living thing that moved through the city house by house. In a small stone dwelling in the upper city, a woman named, we do not know her name, history did not record it, but Josephus recorded what happened inside houses like hers. She sat against the back wall. The plaster was cool against her shoulder blades, the only relief from the heat that pressed through the ceiling. Her 2 children lay beside her. The younger one had stopped crying 3 days ago, not because the pain had passed, because he no longer had the strength. On the shelf across the room, a clay jar sat upside down. She had turned it over that morning, and the morning before, and the morning before that. Each time hoping that something, a handful of flour, a dusting of grain, might fall from the rim. Nothing fell. Above them, the dull percussion of ballista stones striking the city walls sent fine dust raining from the ceiling. Each impact shook the floor beneath her. She could feel the vibration through her spine. "Close your eyes," she whispered to the older child. "Tell me what you want to eat, and I'll describe how it tastes." The child said nothing. He had forgotten what food tasted like. The only taste left in his mouth was the metallic bitterness of dehydration, a taste like rust and dust that never left. That night, her husband crawled through a gap in the northeastern wall. He moved through the darkness on his stomach, pressing his body into the dry grass of the Kidron Valley, reaching for anything, a root, a weed, a handful of wild chicory. A Roman patrol found him before dawn. 500 people were crucified outside the walls that day. 500. Until the Romans ran out of wood for crosses and ground to plant them in. Her husband was one of them. By morning, her children could see his cross from the wall. The older boy recognized him by his tunic. He stood at the parapet and stared. He did not speak. He did not move. He stared until the sun went down and the cross became a shadow, and then he stared at the shadow. On the northeastern parapet, a young zealot, barely 20, his sword unsheathed for so many days that the leather grip had stained his palm, watched the forest of crosses multiplying in the valley below. Row after row, hundreds of them. His lips were cracked to the point of bleeding. His hands shook, not from cold, but from a hunger so deep it had become a vibration in his bones. He looked at the crosses. He looked at the empty granary behind him, the one John of Gischala had burned. We burned our own grain. We did this to ourselves. And now Rome is finishing what we started. His knees buckled. He grabbed the wall to stay upright. the same wall that held him up would be pulled down within weeks. There is a kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. The hunger of watching everything you believed was permanent, every stone, every wall, every certainty, disappear while you stand there unable to stop it. Titus tightened the noose. He ordered his legions to construct a circumvallation wall, a continuous trench and earthen rampart encircling the entire city, studded with guard forts. Completed in days by disciplined Roman engineers. No resupply, no communication, no escape. Jesus had spoken of this exact moment. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its desolation has come near. Luke 21:20. The armies were here. The circle was closed. Jerusalem was buried alive. Recent archaeological excavations by the Israel Antiquities Authority in the Russian compound area of modern Jerusalem have mapped the precise positions of the Roman siege engines through computer modeling and the recovery of hundreds of ballista stones. Smaller stones cleared defenders from the parapets in sweeping arcs. Heavier projectiles cracked the fortification walls at their foundations. Under this relentless suppression, Roman engineers built massive siege ramps, rolled up towering siege towers, then brought iron-headed battering rams against the limestone defenses. By summer, the Romans had battered through the outer walls. The surviving defenders, skeletal, hollow-eyed, beyond exhaustion, retreated to their last refuge, the temple. Inside the sacred courts, the last fighters gripped their weapons with hands that trembled from starvation. Outside the walls, Roman engineers counted their iron bars. Two forces converging on the same stones, one to defend them, one to destroy them. Neither understood what they were truly part of. The month of Av, late summer, 70 AD. The air over Jerusalem tasted like char and iron. The Roman assault on the Temple Mount was hand to hand, court by court, altar step by altar step. The Jewish defenders fought with a ferocity that stunned even the legionaries. They had nowhere left to retreat. Behind them was the Holy of Holies. In front of them was the most powerful military machine the world had ever produced. They chose to die facing forward. In the chaos, the screaming, a clash of iron on iron, the smoke from the lower city rolling across the courts like fog, a Roman soldier stumbled over a body and fell near one of the side chambers of the sanctuary. He pushed himself up. His hands found a piece of timber, already smoldering from a fire that had crept up from the lower terrace. He did not wait for orders. He did not look for his centurion. He stood. He felt the sheet of the brand against his forearm. The wood was almost too hot to grip. His fingers tightened. He drew his arm back. He hurled the burning timber through a low window into the chamber beyond. For 1 second, nothing. Then a hiss. Low, almost gentle, like water touching a heated stone. The dry cedar panels inside the chamber, ancient, oil-soaked, layered with centuries of resin and anointing oil, caught the frame. It spread along the grain of the wood like a living thing, racing horizontally before climbing the wall. The temple tapestries ignited next, then the oil stores. Then the air itself seemed to burn. The hiss became a roar. Josephus records that Titus heard the commotion and ran to the sanctuary. He pushed through his own men. He shouted orders to extinguish the fire. He wanted this building, this wonder of the ancient world, as the crown jewel of his triumph, a trophy to parade before the Roman Senate. But his soldiers were beyond hearing. Titus grabbed a legionary by the shoulder. The soldier shrugged him off without looking. Titus shouted again, Another soldier pushed past him, close enough that their armor scraped. A third knocked the commander aside as he charged toward the sanctuary, not to fight the fire, but to reach the gold before it melted. Months of siege, thousands of their brothers dead, the madness of starvation and slaughter on both sides. And now, gold. Gold on the walls, gold on the doors, gold running like water down the heated marble. And they wanted it. They wanted it more than they feared their general, more than they feared the whip, more than they feared death. The commander of the most disciplined army on earth stood in the middle of his own men, shouting orders that no one obeyed. His authority, absolute everywhere else in the empire, evaporated in the heat of the temple fire. The most powerful man at the siege was powerless at the moment that mattered most. Inside the sanctuary, a priest heard the fire before he saw it. A crackling came from behind him, from the chamber of oils, and it was growing. He was carrying a stone vessel used for purification rites. He turned. Through the doorway, he saw the flames climbing the cedar panels of the inner wall. Orange, then white, then a color he had no name for. He looked down at the vessel in his hands. Slowly, even now, even as the heat pressed against his face and the smoke began to sting his eyes, he knelt. He placed the vessel on the floor, carefully, according to the purity laws, the way he had been taught, the way his father had been taught, the way every priest in his family had handled sacred objects for generations. The fire of God once filled this place, a cloud so heavy the priests couldn't stand. They fell to their knees, not from fear, but from weight, from glory. Now a different fire fills it, and I am on my knees again, but not from glory. He did not stand up. The blood of the slain flowed so heavily down the steps of the great altar that Josephus says it appeared to quench the frames in places. The screams of the dying echoed off the surrounding hills and returned, as if the mountains themselves were crying out. The gold plates on the sanctuary walls glowed orange, then white, then liquid, running in bright streams down the heated marble and pouring in the seams between the massive foundation stones. And the glory departed. Not with a whisper this time, not like Ezekiel's vision, where the presence of God lifted slowly from the temple, paused at the threshold, lingered at the eastern gate, and then rose over the Mount of Olives with the reluctance of a father leaving a house for the last time. Ezekiel 10:18-19. Not like that. This time, the glory departed with a roar, with fire, with iron, with the sound of 1,000 years of worship collapsing into ash. When the fire finally began to die, the Roman soldiers moved through the wreckage of the upper city, the priestly quarter, the wealthy homes. They went house by house with sword and torch. In one of those houses, belonging to the Cathros family, a priestly clan mentioned in the Talmud, the end came fast. Archaeologists discovered a burnt house in 1970, buried under a thick, undisturbed layer of ash and scorched masonry. Stone vessels indicating adherence to strict purity laws. Coins minted during the revolt dated 67 to 69 AD. And among the scorched rubble, they found a Roman iron spear. Lying beside it, the skeletal lower arm of a young woman. Her hand was extended, her fingers reaching for a stone step. She never reached it. 1900 years later, her last gesture was still frozen in the ash. The fire had moved so fast and the smoke so thick that she fell mid-stride, mid-reach, mid-escape. She was still reaching, and no one was coming. And the step was right there, inches from her fingers, a lifetime away. When the fires finally died, a silence settled over the Temple Mount that was worse than a screaming. No chanting from the Levitical choir, no bleating of sacrificial lambs, no sandaled footsteps on limestone, no murmured prayers rising from the courts like heat from summer stone. The sounds that had defined this place for 1,000 years, gone, replaced by the soft creak of cooling timber and the occasional crack of heated stone contracting in the night air. A bird landed on a blackened column. It turned its head. It flew away. There was nothing to land on. The morning mist had not yet lifted from the Kidron Valley when the first iron bar struck the first seam. The sound was not a crash. It was a deep, grinding vibration, metal dragged across limestone, that traveled through the platform and into the ground like a tremor. The soldiers of the Legio X Fretensis stood on the smoldering ruins with iron bars in their hands. Thousands of men, ropes, revers, sledges, following the explicit order of their commander. Josephus recorded Titus's command in the Jewish War, that the entire city and temple be demolished to the very foundation, so thoroughly that no future visitor would ever believe the site had been inhabited. A centurion drove his iron bar into the joint between two massive Herodian ashlars. The iron rang against the stone. Sparks. He hammered a wedge into the crack with a mallet, the sound flat and dull, swallowed by the open sky where the cedar roof had been. He leaned his weight into the bar. His forearms burned. His fingers went numb from the vibration. The stone resisted. He called 2 more men. They drove a second bar into the widening crack. Then a third. They pulled together. The stone groaned, a low, mineral sound, like the earth's objecting. Then it shifted, a fraction of an inch, and the dust of centuries exhaled from the gap in a pale plume that drifted across their faces, coating their lips, filling their mouths with the taste of 1,000 years of incense and blood and prayer. One stone, 40 tons, loosened from its neighbor for the first time since Herod's engineers had placed it there before Jesus was born. Then another. Then another. Day after day, week after week, stones that had taken 46 years to assemble were pried apart by brute force and dragged to the edge of the platform. The soldiers wrapped ropes around the blocks, drove wedges beneath them, and heaved. When a stone reached the edge, they shoved. 80 tons, falling 100 feet. The impact did not produce a crash. It produced a detonation, a deep, concussive blow that shook the valley floor, cracked the limestone street pavement, and sent a shockwave through the ground that the soldiers on the platform felt in their knees. Dust erupted upward in a column that rose 40 feet and drifted south across the valley like smoke from a second fire. One after another, stone after stone, the temple dissolving,
Steady now.
kataluo, just as the Greek word had predicted, boosened down completely. An exhausted centurion stood at the edge of the platform and looked down at the growing mountain of rubble in the Tirapian Valley. Massive ashlars, each one cut with margins so precise they could have been decorative, now jumbled together like a child's discarded blocks. He turned to the soldier beside him and rubbed the stone dust from his eyes. "We've toppled kingdoms in a week.
City
Sir."
over to the ground.
This temple has taken us months. What kind of god needed stones this heavy? He did not wait for an answer. He picked up his iron bar and walked back to the next seam. He was asking the right question. He would never know it. Among the prisoners held at the edge of the platform, forced to watch, forced to carry rubble, forced to witness the annihilation of everything they had worshipped, one man stood motionless. His lips moved. No sound came out. He was reciting something from memory, something he had heard as a child, passed down from his father, who had heard it from a man who had been there on the Mount of Olives 40 years earlier, when a rabbi from Nazareth said something that no one believed. Not one stone upon another. He looked down at the valley. The proof was below him. Every stone loosened. Every stone thrown down. Every single one. He was right. The carpenter was right. About every single stone. And we raft. We looked at these stones, 600 tons, impossible to move, and we rafted him. Modern archaeologists, excavating at the base of the southwestern corner near the remains of Robinson's Arch, discovered this scene frozen in time. A colossal mound of enormous Herodian stones, embedded in the crushed first-century pavement. The street was destroyed by the very stones that once formed the temple above it. The scars are permanent. The proof is still in the valley. When the dust of the demolition finally settled, the site where the house of God had stood in continuous succession for nearly 1,000 years was scraped to bare rock. Not one stone of the temple proper remained upon another. The law was only a shadow, skia, of the good things to come, not the realities themselves. Hebrews 10:1. For 1,000 years the shadow had been cast by the temple. Priests offered the blood of bulls and goats, morning and evening, day after day, year after year, and it was never enough. The shadow repeated because the substance had not yet arrived. But it had arrived. Destroy this temple, Jesus had said, and in 3 days I will raise it up. John 2:19. The disciples thought he was speaking of the stones. He was speaking of his body, the true temple, the one that death itself could not keep in the ground. Once the Lamb of God made atonement on the cross, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood. He entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. Hebrews 9:12. The shadow system was rendered complete, finished, teleioteros, brought to full realization. The physical temple was dismantled because the living temple had already risen. We all have walls we visit, places where we stand and remember what used to be there. But what if the thing that was removed to make room for something that could never be destroyed? The contrast between Babylon and Rome is not a matter of degree, it is a matter of kind. A family leaving Jerusalem in 586 BC moved through the gates in chains. But the mother carried something against her chest, a small scroll borrowed from a scribe, containing the words of Jeremiah. She whispered to her daughter as they walked, 70 years, God promised. Count the years, and your grandchildren will come home. The child looked back at the smoke rising from Solomon's temple. She was 6 years old. She would die in Babylon at 74. But her grandson would walk back through those gates. And he did. A family freeing Jerusalem in 70 AD carried nothing. No scroll, no promise, no number. The mother pulled her son through a burning street while Roman soldiers moved through the houses behind them. The boy looked up at her. "When do we come back?" She didn't answer, because no prophet had spoken, no timeline had been given. There was nothing to count, nothing to wait for, nothing to carry against her chest except her child. Babylon pressed pause, Rome pressed delete, and the deletion was total. The law of Moses required that atonement sacrifices could only be offered by Levitical priests at the sanctuary in Jerusalem. Deuteronomy 12, 5-14. Rome destroyed the sanctuary. Rome scattered and slaughtered the priestly shrines. The Cathros family found in the burnt house was one of them. Both the place and the priesthood were eliminated simultaneously. For nearly 2,000 years since that day, not a single biblical animal sacrifice has been offered according to the Levitical ordinances. Not one. And Rome's erasure extended beyond demolition. Emperor Vespasian instituted the Fiscus Judaicus, a punitive tax that redirected the sacred half-shekel temple contribution away from the ashes of Jerusalem and into the treasury of the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus in Rome. The Jewish people were forced to fund the pagan worship of their conquerors using the exact financial mechanism of their own sacred law. Under Domitian, Roman tax collectors subjected Jewish men to humiliating public physical inspections to determine circumcision, hunting even those who tried to hide their identity. The sacred turned profane. The offering turned to tribute. The worship of the living God forcibly converted into revenue for a statue. But the book of Hebrews had already explained why the shadow was removed. The blood of bulls and goats was only a shadow of the good things to come. Hebrews 10:1. It was a temporary system designed to point toward a permanent sacrifice. Once the true high priest entered the true Holy of Holies, through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, Hebrews 9:11, the earthly replica was complete. Its purpose was fulfilled. And it was removed, not by accident, not by the chaos of war, by the sovereign hand of God, using the armies of Rome as his unknowing instrument. The western wall still stands, but it is not a surviving piece of the temple. It is a portion of the retaining wall Herod built to hold back the earthen fill that expanded the Temple Mount platform. It was never part of the sanctuary where priests offered sacrifices. When Titus ordered total demolition, he made one calculated exception. The western fortification wall and 3 towers of Herod's citadel were preserved to house the Regio Tenfratensis garrison, and to serve as a warning. Josephus recorded Titus's intent to show future generations the scale and power of the city that Rome was mighty enough to crush. The irony is staggering. Titus left it as a monument to Roman supremacy. 2,000 years later, no one remembers it that way. The Jewish people claimed it as the holiest site of mourning in their faith. After the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 AD, Jews were banned from Jerusalem entirely, allowed to return only once a year on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the anniversary of both destructions, to weep at the base of the stones. And the wall became something Titus never intended. Not a monument to Rome, a monument to memory, a monument to loss. And, unknowingly, a silent witness to the precision of a carpenter's words. The fallen stones are still in the valley. You can walk there today. At the base of the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount, near Robinson's Arch, the excavated 1st century street lies exposed. The massive Herodian ashlars, 80-ton blocks, sit embedded in the crushed pavement exactly where they landed 2,000 years ago. The scars are still in the earth, The cracks still radiate outward from the impact points. The proof is still in the valley, waiting for anyone willing to look down. Rome erased the physical temple, but in doing so, Rome established, with the weight of fallen stone and the silence of an empty platform, the authority of the one who said he was the true temple. The carpenter from Nazareth who looked at 600-ton stones and said, "Not one will remain," was right about every single stone. His words outlasted the greatest building project of the ancient world. His prophecy survived the empire that fulfilled it. Rome is ruins, the temple is dust, and his words are still standing. On a warm evening in Jerusalem, any evening, pick one, a man presses his forehead against the western wall. The stone is cruel against his skin despite the summer heat. His lips move in prayer. His palm lies flat against the ashlar, fingers spread, as if trying to feel something through the limestone. A heartbeat, a memory, a presence that was here once and is not here now. He is standing at the retaining wall of something that no longer exists, mourning a building he never saw, fulfilling a grief he inherited from 100 generations before him. Above him, the platform is empty. The question is not whether the prophecy was fulfilled. The stones in the valley have answered that. The empty platform has answered that. The 2,000 years of silence from an altar that once burned every morning and every evening, that has answered it. The question is, what will you do with the one who spoke it? What does the destruction of 70 AD tell you about how God uses even the most powerful empires to fulfill purposes they never intended and never understood? If this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories buried inside these ancient stones are far from finished.